There was a cabinet shuffle the other day in Ottawa, which is always greeted with tremendous excitement on Parliament Hill, but it's mainly inside baseball. I mean, it's been decades, probably close to a century, since cabinet ministers exercised real individual control over their portfolios, as opposed to being coordinated by the Prime Minister's office. Cabinet shuffles are more about style than substance, which is why the media party loves them so much. Who's up, who's down, how many women and minorities and Quebecers are in. There are a few modestly interesting changes. I'm glad Leona Aglukkaq is now the Environment Minister. I like Peter Kent before her, but Aglukkaq is an Inuit woman, which means Canada's environmentalist extremists, like the Sierra Club and Greenpeace and Environmental Defence and the World Wildlife Fund, the vast majority of them being led by privileged white men, well, they just lost half their talking points. I mean, they love to say that Aboriginals don't want oil and gas and mining and pipelines, but of course, that's not true. Those industries are the leading employers of our Aboriginal people, especially in the north where Aglukkaq is from. It will be a bit tougher for these rich white men to mansplain and white-splain to Aglukkaq what's right and wrong for her own people. Jason Kenney has transformed Canada's immigration department, a thankless job, which is why he's been given another thankless job. He's now the Minister of Employment and Social Development, which is a multi-billion-dollar mess of grants and programs that seem to be geared at employment and social development for government bureaucrats and government consultants, not so much for actually solving the problem of unemployment. Kenney broke the logjam in immigration, and he might be able to do the same here out of sheer determination. Pierre Poilievre is another new minister. He's in charge of democratic reform, which might mean he's the man assigned to go on the offensive with the Senate. But look, I'm stretching here. A cabinet shuffle is not a fundamental shift in a government's mission. I suppose you can get a glimpse of the Prime Minister's plans and who he has chosen, but they're just his agents, like the last group was. I mean, to be frank, one of the most heartening changes in the cabinet shuffle was actually in an inanimate object. Here, look at the group photo of the new cabinet. Now look at the cabinet group photo from before. Notice the difference. Look at that horrific painting that was there the last time when the Haitian activist and CBC ideologue Michaël Jean was the Governor General. Yeah, now it's a more fitting photo for the Governor General's office, Rideau Hall, as in Canada's Queen. That's part of the cabinet shuffle too, isn't it? A subtle confirmation that Canada is part of the British Commonwealth. Now, as Anthony Furey and I discussed yesterday, the new cabinet is the kind of thing the media party normally goes gaga over because it has a record number of women cabinet ministers in it. Again, that's irrelevant in terms of substance or talent. Let the cabinet be 100% women or 100% men if they are the best people. But to the media party, who claim to love diversity, despite being almost 100% privileged white liberals themselves, this should have been like catnip. But of course, their love for women and minorities only extends to fellow left-wingers. Conservative minorities and conservative women get extra abuse from the left. Here's Justin Trudeau telling CTV that he thinks Harper's record number of women are just window dressing. They're useless, he implies, just there to look good. This from a man who spends an hour each morning doing his hair.
Half of the new faces are women. Your thoughts?
Again, the only person making any decisions in this government is the Prime Minister. So changing the mouthpieces is not going to make much of a difference.
See, if a conservative would have said that, he'd be called a sexist. Trudeau says that, he's called sexy. Anyways, the media party didn't want to talk about the first Aboriginal environment minister in Canadian history, or the most women ministers in Canadian history, and lucky for them, they found a way out of it. See, a junior staffer in the Prime Minister's office was putting together memos for the new cabinet ministers to get them up to speed with their new departments. And one of the things she was writing about was which journalists or stakeholders were friendly and which were hostile. I mean, that's sort of what politics is, isn't it? But the staffer made the unfortunate choice of using the word enemies to describe journalists who hate the government. It's unfortunate not because it's untrue. Of course, this government has political enemies and enemies in the media. That's politics. It's just that sort of thing isn't usually put down in writing. It's too honest. It's not diplomatic enough. It hurts the feelings of partisan journalists who want everyone to go along with the pretense that they're neutral and nonpartisan. They truly love Stephen Harper just as much as they love Justin Trudeau. The fact that it echoed Richard Nixon's phrase, enemies list, didn't help either. Anyways, this was perfect for the media party that wanted to trash Harper's cabinet shuffle but couldn't find another way to do it. You might even say that it was a perfect opportunity for Harper's enemies in the media to be outraged that they were called enemies. So here's what his enemies in the media said about this junior staffer's use of the word enemies to describe their enmity. Look.
The Prime Minister's office facing questions over an apparent enemies list. A leaked memo tells staffers to draw up lists of friends and enemies of the government.
It's being compared to Nixonian tactics of creating friend lists and enemy lists.
Prime Minister's office is defending its request for enemy lists.
The PMO calls it an enemy list. The opposition calls it a blacklist.
Are bureaucrats, reporters, and stakeholders all being targeted?
Yeah, it was the TV side. Then there were the newspapers, and it's still going full tilt today. Now, I think it's important to understand what this enemies list is. It's not a list of people that the Harper government or a junior staffer regards as enemies to be attacked or undermined by Harper. This isn't Russia or China where journalists who are disliked by the government disappear. It's the opposite direction. These are journalists for whom Harper is their enemy. I think it's obvious that Harper would love it if these journalists were friendlier to him. What cabinet minister wouldn't prefer to have a journalist to be sympathetic or at least neutral? In fact, they go to great lengths to attempt to do that with an army of communications directors, spokesmen, press secretaries, and the like. It's the media party that is implacable, that regards Harper as the enemy. But is it true? Are there enemies in the media, people who despise Stephen Harper and his government, people that new cabinet ministers ought to be careful with? Yeah. I mean, let's start with one of the media party reporters who has been the most revved up about this junior enemies list, a Toronto Star reporter called Susan Delacour. She's been in freak-out mode. She's very sensitive about being called an enemy of Harper, isn't she? Attentive viewers will recall, though, that this is the same Susan Delacour whose brother has been a long-time paid employee of the Liberal Party. Yes, seriously. And this is the same Susan Delacour who attended the going-away party for the former Liberal leader, Michael Ignatieff. And when he gave his goodbye speech, Delacour actually cried. She cried when Ignatieff said he was leaving. Did she cry when Preston Manning left, when Stockwell Day left? It's laughable even to ask that question. Or this picture, which I find endlessly enlightening. That's the Huffington Post's Althea Raj, and Maclean's Magazine's Paul Wells posing for a Facebook-style picture with Justin Trudeau. And the picture was snapped by Trudeau's campaign manager. They're friends. And not just Facebook friends, good friends. Raj wrote a loving biography of Trudeau. Wells is a longtime Liberal, a confidant. A few years ago, while pretending to be a journalist, a neutral journalist, he took a vacation at the country cottage of senior Liberal MP Scott Bryson. Could you imagine the chief parliamentary columnist for a national magazine hanging out for a week or weekend privately at the Harper's summer cottage somewhere, just kicking back with the Harper family, just for fun, not on assignment, not writing about it, just a personal vacation with some friends? It's unthinkable. Now, being totally in love with the Liberals, crying when Ignatieff leaves, laughing with Trudeau, vacationing with Scott Bryson, that doesn't necessarily mean those same media party reporters are enemies of Harper. But politics is a zero-sum game. Only one person can be prime minister. Only one person can win each riding. Only one party can win an election. If you are a Liberal stalwart, by definition, you are not a Conservative. So it's a range from mere antipathy to outright hatred, enemies. I don't think that Althea Raj and Paul Wells despise Harper, but they enjoy putting the boots to him and see nothing wrong with being personal friends with Trudeau while they do it. Here's Craig Oliver, the senior hand at CTV, with a warning to young reporters making that same mistake that he did, getting too close to the Liberals.
My whole network of friendships were all Trudeau's cabinet ministers and eventually Trudeau himself.
In fact, we
became friends. I am aware that I compromised myself, and I never made that mistake again. I never made the mistake of becoming so close to powerful people.
You heard him. He said he felt compromised because there was still a tiny little objective reporter inside his Liberal self. He had cognitive dissonance. He wasn't completely comfortable with being a Liberal. She'll give him marks for having a conscience. But other journalists don't even pretend to be objective. I mean, an obvious example is Glenn McGregor, who has written over 100 stories about the so-called robocall scandal that he alleges that the Conservatives stole the last election, even though the only person who is actually being convicted of making illegal robocalls was a Liberal MP from Guelph named Frank Valeriot. McGregor is the Liberal Party's go-to man when they're in trouble, like when Justin Trudeau's outrageous speaking fees as an MP were exploding. The Liberals went to McGregor for damage control, and he happily spun the story as best he could and buried the damaging details. Just last week, when Jason Kenney criticized David Suzuki for calling for a none-is-too-many immigration policy, a zero immigration policy, instead of remarking on Suzuki's extreme position, McGregor thought, well, criticizing Suzuki is out because they're both left-wingers, and Jason Kenney's making too many points off this, so what could Ottawa's greatest journalist say about it? Well, of course, he wrote, the biggest surprise is that dumb hick Kenny from that dumb hick province of Alberta can read Francais like we fancy media types can. He actually, look at that, you can see his tweet right there. Hell, give McGregor, an ex-strip club DJ, another Journalist Lifetime Achievement Award for journalism, eh? But look, it's not just him. I mean, just take out of the blue Mike D'Souza, also a Post Media, the environmentalist reporter there. Really a Greenpeace activist without the membership card. At least I think he doesn't have a membership card. He doesn't really do environmental reporting, though. He does environmental advocacy. If you read D'Souza, you quickly see that he tells a story every day, and it fits into a narrative. Mother Earth has friends and enemies. Mother Earth likes Stéphane Dion and the Green Shift and Elizabeth May and foreign-funded eco-extremists, but Mother Earth does not like Stephen Harper and his government. I read D'Souza and I read Greenpeace press releases. They really are interchangeable. Now, I'm not picking on him. My whole point is that the media party as a whole, the bulk of them, not all of them, but many of them, even most of the time, act as a party, just like a political party with friends and enemies. They certainly have their own enemies list. I mean, take the Toronto Star. They have a political party platform welded right into their corporate bylaws. Seriously, it's called the Atkinson Principles. It's a party platform. It's socialist. It talks about putting the means of production into the hands of the proletariat. Seriously, if you read the Toronto Star's official mission statement, what their company is supposed to do as a business, it is to advocate for the nationalization of key industries, from railways to logging to everything in between. It's to the left of the NDP. This is the Toronto Star. I'll get back to the Star in a moment. Then there's Judy Rabick. She used to be with the CBC, but they were too right-wing for her, I guess, so she took a bunch of union money and started up an extremist website called Rabble. They don't just write off-the-hook, conspiracy theory-style anti-Harper stuff, but they actively organize politics, too. They truly are a political party. I have seen Rabble staff organizing political events, especially Occupy Toronto events and I Don't Know More events. They have an enemies list, and I'm very pleased to be on it. Even so-called mainstream newspapers like the Globe and Mail, which calls itself the newspaper of record, they let this NDP partisan named Joe Kaplan rant like a crazy man. He talks about how Stephen Harper is fascist, destroying our democracy, and likely stole the last election, too. Cuckoo. Anyway, back to the Star, the newspaper of Susan Delacourt, who's been clutching her pearls the most about Harper's list of hostile reporters. Well, it's the Star that has an enemies list. Enemy number 1 is Rob Ford, the mayor of Toronto. Enemy number 2 is Rob Ford also. And hey, look at that. The enemy number 3 is Rob Ford too. They're obsessed with getting Rob Ford. They campaigned overtly against him in the last municipal election. They asked other candidates to drop out to consolidate the anti-Ford vote. They went insane. They developed Rob Ford derangement syndrome. They stalked his country cottage, asking his neighbors up there for dirt on him. They stalked his house in Toronto, sneaking around his home at dusk, standing up on blocks to peer into his backyard over the fence, peeping Tom style, to take pictures at night at his house. And the masterpiece of their war on Ford was their series of stories on a videotape they claimed they saw on a cell phone while sitting in the back of a drug dealer's car. The drug dealer wouldn't give that video to them. That magically disappeared, so did the drug dealer. But we used to call that a crazy rumor, gossip, something that maybe Ford should get a restraining order on the Star about. But the Star ran with it for a month. Enemies list, eh? Yeah. Not just the Star, that's my point. It's most of the media. It's the biggest of them. The Star is the biggest. But the CBC got into the Ford action, too. They brought in the old alleged comedian Mary Wallace from Newfoundland, flying her in just to have her trespass on Ford's property, shouting at him cluelessly, and then they threw on a laugh track so they could call it comedy and run it on their comedy show that specializes in mocking conservative enemies. Now, I like Rick Mercer. He skewers politicians of various stripes, but there is no denying that he has a special loathing for conservative politicians, especially Stockwell Day and Jason Kenney. He doesn't just mock them. He sets up campaign-style websites like the one proposing that Stockwell Day change his name to Doris Day. Here it is. Just watch for a second.
We demand that the Government of Canada force Stockwell Day to change his first name to Doris.
Look, at least Mercer doesn't hold himself out as a straight-shooting reporter like Delacourt and McGregor do. Look, it's war out there. I get it. It's a zero-sum game. I get it. And politicians without the courage or ability to win elections often go into journalism as the second best choice. They're a bit bitter about it, often, as voyeurs often are, as people who can watch but can't touch are. But hey, all parties do it. All parties have their friends and enemies. You might say, I have a special passion for criticizing the shiny pony, Justin Trudeau. I won't deny it. But the feeling is mutual. I mean, half the time when he sees that it's us, he won't answer the Sun's questions. Like when we dared to ask him about his rich speaking fees he charged as an MP. Look.
What do you say to critics who argue that you should have stopped paid speaking events involved with government institutions upon your nomination in 2007?
I say I have set a new bar for transparency. I have gone above and beyond what Parliament, what the Ethics Commissioner, what anyone has asked in response to questions by journalists. I am happy that I have set that new bar for transparency. I am happy that I always followed all the Ethics Commissioner's rules, and I have said everything I'm going to say on that particular issue.
So when the Sun asks him, he says, oh, I've said everything I'm going to say on the subject. But he gave a private briefing on the subject to McGregor because he knew it would be a puff piece. We asked tough questions, and he explains by saying, shut up. Seriously, it's got to the point where he's so used to having loving treatment from all the other journalists that when, say, someone at the CBC accidentally asked a tough question, Trudeau naturally assumed it was us. Remember this? Look.
Is there wisdom in talking to the Taliban? The U.S. is engaging the Taliban. My people are asking me to ask that to you, sir.
Yes, your Sun News people, I know.
Sir, that's my request.
That was hilarious. Poor CBC reporter. He asked the tough question and is immediately thrown out of the Cool Kids Club and put on Trudeau's enemies list because he thought he was with the Sun. I mean, how likely is it that that poor CBC reporter will ever be allowed to pose with Trudeau for some Facebook photos like his true friends are allowed to do? Of course, Stephen Harper has reporters he likes and those he doesn't. Of course, Justin Trudeau does also, and our friend Thomas Mulcair does too. I call him my friend because he has an intimate interest in me personally. Remember this?
Is the President of the Treasury Board now responsible for determining whether or not Peter Mansbridge is allowed to be paid more than Ezra Levant?
He has strong opinions that I not be paid too much. That's weird in one way, but it's not weird in another. I mean, come on. He thinks I'm his political enemy. I'm on his enemies list. This isn't new. I mean, the best investigative reporter at the CBC, Terry Milewski, years ago when Jean Chrétien was Prime Minister, Terry once left the pack and started asking tough questions about whether Chrétien's office directed the RCMP to pepper spray those peaceful student protesters at the APEC conference in Vancouver about 15, 16 years ago. He asked too many questions. So Chrétien's office ordered the CBC to suspend Terry Milewski from reporting on the story. And they did. They actually did. See, if the CBC isn't pro-liberal enough on its own, then the official Liberal Party intervenes to make sure it's more liberal. Any questions? I don't think Chrétien was on Milewski's enemies list. I think Milewski was just following a hell of a story. And it paid off in the end. Milewski was proved right. But Milewski was on Chrétien's enemies list. The Liberals have their enemies list. The NDP does. I'm sure the Prime Minister does too. But I think it's fair to say the most vicious, most catty, most personal, most vengeful of all is not actually any of the official parties, but like I say, the media party itself. Put aside what you think of Mike Duffy and his Senate expenses. That's not what I'm talking about now. I'm talking about how the media party treats its enemies, especially when they're jealous that a former colleague got a Senate appointment to actually get to be a politician, and they're still stuck sitting in a small TV studio playing politics. Here, watch CTV's Don Martin in the most insane, bitter, personal, vicious rant I can remember seeing. This actually went to air. CTV's producers approved it. This thing was broadcast because, yeah, Mike Duffy was on the media party's enemies list. Look.
So let's talk about the true political sorcerer who has elevated fakery to a dark art. Yes, old Duff, that's you. Mike Duffy stopped being my friend a few years back when he took to the air to lambaste one of the best MPs for not supporting the Conservatives. Upon his appointment in late 2008, he immediately proved to be a fake friend.
Holy cow! That went on. Now, when the grown-ups at CTV saw that, they yanked it off their website and threw it down the memory hole, probably for fear of a defamation suit. I mean, that just got worse. But equally because Don Martin gave away the game. He proved, maybe even more than the Toronto Star's war on Rob Ford or the CBC's war on Conservatives, that there really is an enemies list in Ottawa, and the people wielding it the most brutally aren't politicians. They're journalists. Oh.